Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. Please be seated. In the spring of 1869, a 31-year-old John Muir made his way to the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Up to this point, his life had taken him from his birthplace in Scotland to his family's new home in Indiana, from where he decided to make a 1,000-mile walk down to the Gulf of Mexico and Florida, over to Havana, Cuba, then finally sought passage from there over to California. Muir was a chronicler and observer of the natural world, a voracious observer who loved noticing the subtle differences from one ecosystem to the next, the plants, the animals, all of the creatures that made up a place. And he had this incredible appetite for experiencing new places. And it was that appetite that drove him westward. The mountains were calling to him. He arrived there below the Sierras, on the dusty plains, the grasses dried and scorched in the sun, with almost nothing, his pockets empty, no certainty of where his next meal would come from. But he knew that he needed to be there. He made friends with a shepherd who needed an extra person to tend his flock, to lead them up into the mountains, the path that they walk every summer, going from the lowlands that as they dry out, as the grasses have no more fodder for the animals, they follow the snow melt upward, going higher and higher as the melt comes down. And so Muir joined this group, a few other men and their flock of sheep, and made his way up to the mountains. He took copious notes in a journal on this trip that would later be published into a book, My First Summer in the Sierra. And in it, he describes the experience of moving upward, higher and higher, from those sun-scorched plains to the first areas of scrubby oak that eventually yielded to sugar pines and these other towering pine forests, and how the landscape filled out with green as they made their way up the rivers, higher and higher, the water growing colder and colder, but nourishing more and more plant life. He witnessed the spring bloom of wildflowers in the higher elevations, columbines and poppies, tulips springing forth in all different hues of red and yellow and blues and purples. He marveled in it all. Eventually, they made their way into the high meadows of Yosemite Valley, flanked on all sides by giant mountains, with imposing granite cliffs on all sides, creating this giant cathedral. Muir was taken by all of it. He wanted to take all of it in, to absorb every bit of it. He was fascinated by the diversity of plant life, by the way that animals made their homes in each of these different habitats that they made their way through, by the seemingly endless diversity of the land. He writes especially eloquently of the view from the mountaintops, of how stunning it was to see the Yosemite Valley stretch out before him. What originally drove him to those mountains was his curiosity, was a desire to know, to understand, to learn, to experience. In some ways, it's that same hunger for adventure that animates so many great stories. The sort of lone man captivated by a new place, a new location, a new experience, who goes off in search of it, whether that's to conquer it or to simply observe it and to take it all in. But what Muir experienced in the Sierras transformed him. In the bigness of the landscape, in the endless diversity of forms that he encountered there, He didn't feel like someone who was just taking it all in or able to consume it all or observe it all or note it all. It felt so much bigger than him. And he came to the realization that he was a part of something much bigger, that he was dwarfed by that landscape, that he was part of this fabric of creation that went far beyond him, that he was merely one thread in a rich and wonderful tapestry. In our gospel reading today, we hear about the festival of the Jews taking place in Jerusalem around the Passover. And amongst the crowd are two Greeks. We don't know anything more about them, but presumably they've heard of this Jesus, this new teacher who has sprung up there in Jerusalem, who has some interesting ideas about the law, about the faith that he has inherited, and about who he is. They've heard stories of his transforming water into wine, his healings, maybe his driving out of demons, the ways that he has upset the temple authorities and the Roman officials. Whatever it was they knew about him, they were drawn to him. They wanted more. They were curious. They wanted to feed their own need to know, their own curiosity. And so they come to Philip, one of Jesus' Greek followers, and say, "We would like to see Jesus." So Philip goes to Andrew and Philip go to Jesus, and they let him know of these two men who have shown up who want to see Jesus. And in classic Jesus fashion, he completely fails to answer the question at hand. The time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. What does that mean? Instead of answering their question of whether these men could come and see him, Jesus wants to reframe the question as a whole. It's an implicit criticism of the disciples and of the people who they were talking to of thinking too small. Is what he is trying to tell them, what he's been trying to tell them for much of the time that they've been with him, is that he came not so a couple of Greeks could come and see him and decide for themselves whether he is the Messiah or not, or whether he's who he says he is, or if he has anything interesting to say at all. What he has come for is something much bigger. It's nothing short of the salvation of the world and the redemption of the whole of creation. It is time for the Son of Man to be glorified, to be lifted up above the earth, to be revealed for who he is. Each of the Gospels have their own telling of the moment in which the nature of who Jesus is revealed. And often it happens in stages. In Matthew's Gospel, we get that first moment of Jesus being revealed to the world that comes from the Magi, the wise men who travel east following a star. They see the star resting over Bethlehem where Jesus is there with his family. And they come in and they kneel before him and they offer gifts fit for a king. It is the moment when Jesus is proclaimed King of the Jews, and that message is carried back to those outside of the land of Israel. In other Gospels, we get the voice of God breaking, and in Matthew's, the voice of God breaking forth from the clouds during Jesus' baptism to proclaim him God's Son, the Beloved. And that same voice breaks forth in the scene of the Transfiguration. But in John's Gospel, we get none of those stories. What we do get is this emphasis on the cross, that it is the moment of Jesus' death that God is glorified, that is when Jesus is lifted up there on the cross, that who he is and what he has come for is revealed not only to the people of Israel, but to the world, to all who would be willing to hear it. Jesus makes it clear that his vision is not just this limited one for his followers or the people who knew him in this life, or those who had met him in person, or those who had seen him with their own eyes. The Son of Man will be lifted up in order to draw the whole world to himself, in order to draw all people to himself. His vision is so much bigger than that of the disciples or of these two folks who came wanting to see him. And he tries to get that point across using this metaphor or this parable of the seed. While he is there on the earth, Jesus is a single seed in one place, in one time. And while there may be something nourishing to that seed, the potential that it carries with it is so much more. It is only when the seed has been planted in the ground, its whole burst open, the life that is contained within it bursting forth, that it begins to be revealed in its full potential. That single seed of wheat will grow into a stalk and will produce hundreds of more seeds. Those seeds will fall to the ground, they will die, they will be cracked open, they will put up hundreds of more stalks of wheat, and the same thing happens again and again until the whole field is covered and beyond. That is the image Jesus wants to give them. That he is not there just for them, for these few individuals who he happened to call to follow him. But he has come to give life abundant to the whole earth, to all people, to everyone who would follow him, who would come after him, who would accept the gift that he has come to offer. The single seed becomes many and many and many, until the Son of Man is lifted up and draws all people and the whole world to himself. Writing about his experience in the Sierra, John Muir had this experience of coming to the top of these mountains and seeing the grandness, the vastness of the landscape, and feeling dwarfed by it all. And realizing in that very moment that he was just a small part in something much larger, a single thread in that giant tapestry of creation. And he writes this: "No Sierra landscape that I have seen holds anything truly dead or dull, or any trace of what in manufactories is called rubbish or waste. Everything is perfectly clean and pure and full of divine lessons. This quick, inevitable interest attaching to everything seems marvelous until the hand of God becomes visible. Then it seems reasonable that what interests him may well interest us. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. One fancies a heart like our own must be beating in every crystal and cell, and we feel like stopping to speak to the plants and animals as friendly fellow mountaineers. Nature is a poet, an enthusiastic working man becomes more and more visible the farther and higher we go, for the mountains are fountains, beginning places, however related to sources beyond mortal ken. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." Muir may have been drawn to those mountains by his own individual curiosity and interest, but what he found was that he was part of something so much bigger, that he was part of this interconnected whole of all the whole human family and of creation itself, one thread in that tapestry that God has woven. One of the pitfalls that I think contemporary or modern Christianity falls into is putting an overly strong emphasis on the individual, reducing the Christian faith to something that is essential for individual salvation. That what matters most about Jesus' message is whether that I have accepted into my heart and I will be saved. And while Jesus is clear that he wants followers and all who would come after him to accept the gift that he offers, the gift is never for them alone. It is not for any one of us. But what Jesus' death on the cross, the love that he revealed through his birth, through his life, through his death, through his resurrection, is for the whole of humanity. That the Son of Man will be lifted up and will draw all people to himself. And that is what Jesus is trying to get across to his disciples. that he's not there for them. He's not there for these Greeks who are curious to see him. He is there for all of humanity. He is there for the recreation and restoration of the world, to issue in a new covenant that is not just given to the people of Israel, but that is given to all of God's people, the whole human family, and to all of creation. His being lifted up on the cross is about nothing short than the remaking and restoration of the world. We are part of this interconnected whole of the human family. We are a part of God's creation. As Aldo Leopold, another great ecologist in the line of John Muir, puts it, we are plain member and citizen of a whole human family, plain member and citizen of a whole earth community. That is the realization that Muir came to there, sitting in the Sierras, looking out from the mountaintops at the Yosemite Valley stretching below him. And that is what Jesus is trying to get across to the disciples, that they are part of a family, the whole of humanity stretching back in time and forwards in time in every corner of the earth, who have all been offered the gift of love and redemption, the gift of abundant life in Christ. And it is only when we look outside of our own self, our own narrow frame of focus, our own individual desires and curiosities, and begin to see that our life is bound to the lives of everyone around us. As Thomas Merton puts it, it requires that we wake up from the dream of separateness and see our lives intertwine with one another's, to see that the gift of God's love hasn't been given to me, but has been given to us to care for, to shepherd, to steward, and to show it forward. You're not an assemblage of individual flames, but a great fire burning across the world. One family who have been given the gift of God's love and has been poured into our hearts, and that we are invited and called to share with others. As we continue this journey through Lent and towards the cross, may we share in the awareness that Muir found there in the Sierras, and that Jesus conveyed in his reminder that he came to be lifted up for the whole human family. May we recognize that we are part of one family, part of one human community, that we stand above nothing in God's creation, nor below it. May in that solidarity with all that God has made, may we collectively stand at the foot of the cross with our arms open, ready to receive the gift of love that moves through us and through all that God has made. Amen.